I really like the way the exhibition looks and the way you installed it.
Yeah, that was
The images you sent were just brilliant. I mean, there's that house feel, and I like to think that I make a kind of work that's domesticated. It's kind of my job to bring the outside in,
yes,
with the
sir.
landscapes and these imaginary pieces I made. And so I like the fireplaces. I really like the look of the museum, the way it has a house kind of feel to it. As an artist, I never want to make a painting or a construction that goes to war with the space it's in. But at
Exactly.
the same time, it has to, it's got to have its own integrity.
Mhm.
And these things matter a lot. They really do. That's the thing about the way you and I both grew up. There was very little, there was no art in the public schools of Mississippi. So I didn't have anything to unlearn when I got to college and graduate school. But I wanted to be an artist before I knew what one was. And my family, to their everlasting credit, said, "Oh, he'll be all right. He'll amount to something, whatever it might be." But there was none of that, oh, do something to fall back on. Hell, I just wanted to be an artist. And I had to go out and figure out what one was, and working in a gallery certainly worked. But I was that kid that always made drawings in class. I was a clown, class clown. I made these drawings. I remember when I was in high school in Miss Gatewood's English class, we were reading, all of us reading William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and everybody, and I made drawings every day that were pretty much would have worked in Mad Magazine. But all kinds of body parts were getting cut off and thrown around the room. And I'd slip them around. People just open them up and laugh and fall on the floor. And Roy Thompson, Lord love him, he's dead now, ate one of those drawings and kept Miss Gatewood from getting it. Otherwise, I'd have been kicked out of school like that. So art can be nourishing if you're really. Well, something was changing in the art world in the late 60s, early 70s. Galleries were opening up in New York, and people were starting to buy art and own it and collect it. And that wasn't happening in a decade before. And so I've got good friends that are just my generation, James Searles, John Alexander. They all taught for a while, and we all quit at about the same time without getting on the phone and talking to each other. We just, stepped out into the marketplace because it existed, and it just didn't exist before. You could have, I mean, they're terrific artists from Mississippi that were, working in the 40s and 50s, and they had to almost do something else to make a living. So I felt the same way. Art's a very expensive habit, and I do anything to support it.
Yeah.
It's its own kind of reward in some ways, but it helps to be able to make a living doing what you're doing. And people are owning it now, and I'm finding at this point, I like people find me and they want to work, and that's kind of important. I like that.
Awesome.
I like making it, and I like turning loose, and I like to see the check clear. I say tongue in cheek sometimes, no art takes place until the check clears. So I did have a professor once that told me, he said, "Bill, if you can make something with your hands and sell it for the same amount of money as a good used pickup, you're doing pretty damn well in America." But the cost of pickups are going up and up all the time. Well, I've got this theory that if I've got this hungry eye, an insatiable eye that wants to, if I could see fresh new art all the time, I might not make it. But I make these things for what I think are the right reasons. That's because I want to see them. And that's and some I make some art you can own, and I make some art that destroys itself, that is unownable. But it doesn't really matter. You're just doing it all the time anyway. You're propping things up. Yeah, that's the truth about that whole business. I'm totally a product of the university system, as are you, I dare say. But I taught there for a while and I put some back in it. But after that last critique, no one gives a damn whether you ever write another poem or make another painting, another photograph at all. You've got to make the audience, as I tell. But I do about 2 or 3 lectures a year in colleges and universities, and tell them what I said. I can tell you everything I know with one tray of slides and 50 minutes, but it's not enough to make the art. You have to also make the audience for it. And that's why I'm glad to be showing in Monroe, quite frankly. I mean, there are people that wouldn't see the work otherwise, that I'm happy to, that the museum exists and I can cooperate. As you know, we had some problems with tornadoes and fires and floods and everything. So this exhibition should have happened about 4 years ago, but it's happening now, and that's all that matters. Monroe's a rich culture. I know Monroe. I know that part of the world. It's the handful of people that have made a great deal of money there have put it to work for culture, and I appreciate that very much.
Yes, sir.
I'm not convinced that's not the best place to grow up, in a small town like Monroe, where there are museums, where there's music, there's symphonies and things to do, and just close enough to an airport to get out and see the world.
Yes, sir.
I go to Mississippi I'll throw this out for what it's worth. I go to Mississippi in early June to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters, which I appreciate very much. But my life ain't over, man. At this point in my career, and I was born in 44 at the end of World War II. But I'm making some of the best art of my life, and that's a nice thing. If I were playing baseball, it would have been over a long time ago. But as it is, it's the artist is nothing. Picasso, they should have a disclaimer on every tube of oil paint that it'll make you live a long time and chase women and occasionally be very good at both. So. An FDA disclaimer. I think I'll initiate that with my congressional caucus.
Yes, sir. Into
Well, when you think about it, the teaching is the only patron. The church is not a patron anymore. The individuals don't exist who are patrons of the art, but the teaching does. And I did it for a decade at Appalachian State and in North Carolina, and really enjoyed it and miss it. But I haven't really had a job, as I'm fond of saying, since 1979. But I've never worked harder. I would never work this hard for someone else. You just don't do it. I look back now at the couple of years that I worked in a commercial gallery when I was in undergraduate school. It's very important because no one that I had some great teachers. I don't complain about that, but they had never run a studio. They'd never really sold a painting. They've never done what I'm doing, which is to step out, because that world didn't exist. When you think about it, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, those guys, they lived off stipends from Betty Parsons and other dealers. That was the 1950s. And, those things are worth millions of dollars now, but they never saw that money. They never saw a penny of it. Well, but the main thing is just to draw. When I'm asked these days by people, what should I do? Where should I go to school? Which I say, just draw, just draw.
Just make
and the kids that I taught at Appalachian State were many of them were first generation college students, but a lot of Duke and North UNC legacies were coming to school there because they could rent a big house out in the country, ski all winter, and stay high. So they would like to do that. But one of the things that my university allowed me to do, and it still exists today, is open a branch campus in New York. So People's Express were those cheap airlines you could fly in and out of New York, round trip for $60. From Greensboro. So we opened a campus in New York with the development office's blessing. They said, I was given a certain amount of money and said, don't want to know what you do with this. But I came back with a branch campus. So ASU-NY works today. And it's, Wake Forest had a campus in Venice, and University of Georgia had a campus in some hilltop town in Italy, and that's fine and well, but those are dead cultures to contemporary art for the most part. So going to New York made sense, and it didn't do me any harm either. So I got to see a lot of art and run and jump, and we had a good. I miss that. Those are the things I miss about teaching. I'm a great believer in osmosis, and that's what the New York campus did for so many of my students. They were getting picked up in bars by artists that they'd been studying in art history. And no one ever got their purse stolen or their fanny pinched. It just worked, and made travelers of a number of them. And I still hear from students, this is back in the 70s, and I hear from students who say, thank you for taking us to New York for the first time. And I'd go up there and I'd find them, being interns for Betty Parsons and people like that. It was just remarkable. So, there are so many different ways to learn, so many different ways to teach. Every time you make a painting, you're teaching, whether you want to or not.
So you're making
it's the same thing. I did this, I've kept sketchbooks I go through about 3 or 4 years. I've kept them all since college, and I pulled them down 5 or 6 years ago from a very high shelf in my studio in Virginia, and started to look through them for ideas for paintings. But I found these ideas for little stories, for sketches. I found some complete short stories, and I said, damn. But it's hypothetical realism, what I call what I do. And it started out being tongue in cheek, but how the people that write about art are, they've got to have a category. So there was hyper realism, there was anal realism, there's always kind of be photorealism. So I call what I do hypothetical realism. These places and situations aren't real, but they could be. And the same holds true for the short stories. Some of them are nasty little things. I don't like everybody I write about. It's not me talking, it's these characters. William Faulkner, the infinitely quotable William Faulkner, was asked once whether it was content or character that drove his work. He said, oh, it's character. All I do is invent these people, then run along behind them and write down what they say. And that's a damn good way to describe. And I flatter myself by comparing what I do to Mr. Faulkner's, but that's it works. And stories are interesting to do. But I was well into my 7th decade before I wrote the first one, got them published. So they're the same thing though. They're little ideas like sketches for the paintings.
Awesome. Call myself an artist.
Well, but when you think about it, language is a Southerner's birthright. So if we can't tell the story, who in the hell can? And I was fortunate to have a wonderful professor, Norris Long, whose vocabulary and his eye were a lock. They really fit together, and I envy him, and I've tried to emulate him in so many ways. But you need to be able to talk about things without explaining them. You know, I mean, the old-fashioned definition of the word apology comes to mind. An apology is really an explanation. So I like to apologize about some of this art. It's like you emailed me a couple of times about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, and those shapes on that painting that look like hooded figures are in fact ironing board covers. You know. And one of the things you can do is change an object just by where you put it.
Exactly.
I think Warhol did that with his Brillo boxes when he put them on a stand in the Whitney Museum. They became something else altogether. So it's that kind of magic that I'm interested in art, you know. And the buffaloes, the first buffalo I saw was on the back of a nickel, you know. And then I was fishing out of Yellowstone. And caught one on my back cast. I was fly fishing Yellowstone River, and a buffalo very quietly walked up and I caught him. I cut it loose, I can assure you, but he never knew he was caught. It was my concept that you know, I was able to. But you know, the buffalo is a strong symbol, a strong American symbol, and so I like that. The rose is the same ways, and these hunting dogs too are symbols for me. They're stand-ins for an often absent human presence in the work, you know. So they have a place. But and I say this. And I think it's true that the viewer's opinion, the viewer's story about what's there is as valid as mine. Exactly. I don't have anything more to say than he does or she does. So it works out that way. Well, you know, it's one of the things that makes sense of that when you look at the paintings from the Gilded Age of Holland. You know, Rembrandt and Frans Hals made those portraits of all those old burghers, all those old businessmen. Nobody has a clue who they are. And the same thing's true with the still lifes, all those flowers and watches and scales. They meant something to those people. Memento mori. They had a lot to do with life and death. We don't have a clue now. We just know they're beautiful paintings and look at them entirely differently from this point of view from the 21st century. But art lives, you know, whether the people who made it live or not. And so it's a way to cheat the grave a little bit, just slightly.
Exactly.
One of the things I want to say too is that everything in our world, our current world, has gotten political, and that's heartbreaking. But from my point of view, I'm absolutely neutral. I'm neutral on the American Civil War. As I said, I paint a blue and I paint a gray one, so I'm not trying to say anything one way or the other. Monuments are coming down right and left, and I can understand that. But at the same time, as someone growing up in North Mississippi, when I did, looking for influence, looking for public sculpture, there was none. I had to go to cemeteries to see the occasional carving of a lamb or an angel, you know. Yeah. And of course, of course, Webster County was too damn poor in Walthall and the county seat, even I could have a Confederate monument. But I want to know where the energy for putting more things up is. That's what I'm waiting for. I want to see more positive things happen, and that means a lot. I want to drive, you know, those old, so many, kudzu is an extraordinary Gothic thing that's come to the American South. And I saw it in an old Rodin movie, one of those Japanese horror movies. Kudzu came from Japan to stop the erosion of the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s. But it'll take over a barn or an old building. I've seen these buildings. I drive by them and the kudzu's on its way in there, and it gets to it, it'll grow over the building, and you see the shape of the building, and the kudzu covers it up. I've never painted that, but I see it all the time, and it's out there. It's just in our world. And I was driving along with my wife several years ago and saw a little flower. We stopped and looked at the kudzu up close and personal. And damned if that thing doesn't flower. I've never seen flower on kudzu. Well, I've never really set out to be a Southern artist. I've been categorized that way, but I want to be an American artist. That makes sense. But one of the things I've learned from is the literature of our region. You know, I really have learned more from writers, how they work, their process, than I have from other painters, from other artists. And I think that what William Faulkner did, what Eudora Welty did, Margaret Walker Alexander, people like that, these great writers, you know, all it takes is, Mr. Faulkner said, all it takes to be a writer is a little money for alcohol, tobacco, and some paper and pencil. You know, our intrinsic cost as printmakers and artists is a little bit more than that. But and you got to haul that stuff around too, you know. So it's interesting, but I take a great deal of comfort in the fact that William Faulkner did what he did when he did, and he sprung from the same hill tribes of Mississippi as I do. And I read Faulkner now, and I realize I'm reading about my family, and not all of them are Compsons. I can assure you, there's a Snopes or two in there. So it's very compelling. It's very interesting. It's good to be in that category. Well, you know, one of the nice things about being from our part of the world is that expectations are never very high. So it's pretty easy to outflank these folks intellectually. Well, you know, there's another thing about where we're from. There's a very strong sense of place, and that shows up in my work too. As a matter of fact, my alma mater, University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, put a conference on a few years back on around that idea of the sense of place. And we had writers come in there, and poets and painters, and did an exhibition. And I think it matters a lot. And Eudora Welty was once asked, why the South? Why I was all that writing going on, and I said, well, I don't know. It's like the storm clouds gather. They gather over Russia, and it rains and storms and lightnings for a while. Then it goes over Ireland, it rains and storms. And it's that storm, that literary storm, gathered over the states of Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Georgia. And look what happened. You know, a lot of interesting things occurred. But they're not over yet. I'm very taken with the people that are writing now, with the young artists that are getting some attention in the American South right now. I think it's.
I wanted to.
Well, there are an awful lot of those. I tell you, I drive through the Mississippi Delta and the Louisiana Delta a good deal, and the two buildings that mean the most are the Cotton Gin, which is almost always defunct, and the Little Baptist Church. Usually they're black churches, but there'll be a little church out there, and that you see those all the damn time in the rural landscape. And people have abandoned one, and they still go to the other. They still attend the church. So I'm in the Mississippi Delta around Greenville and Bolivar County. A lot of these old gins have been repurposed as party spaces, but for the most part, they don't function anymore. People load their baled cotton up on a truck and take it off to another state, and so I just like the way they look. There's something noble about these old buildings, and their function has changed. So they show up in my work quite a lot. And you said that there's no human presence in this, but those telephone poles, if you notice, are marching off just like people into the distance, in the middle distance. There's a little church back there, and the cotton fields. I wrote a piece for Delta magazine a couple of years ago. I was driving in February, and I was driving up toward Sumner, and I saw this cotton, this white, over against the tree line. I said, some old farmer, and he didn't get his cotton out of the field. It's rained on it. It's February, and he should have gotten it out. Then it got up and flew, and it was snow geese. When I was a kid growing up in that part of the world, there were no snow geese. You know, there were none of these migratory birds that came in. But now the snow geese is a white bird, and it looked just like cotton. And so my brand loyalty was off a little bit. I mistook it. But when it started to fly, it was a great symbol, and I've used those white birds in a a lot of the works. We don't see parallel lines or straight lines in nature very often. Just occasionally, sunlight will break through a cloud, or the quartz. When you hit quartz with a hammer, it'll break off into square areas. But that doesn't happen very often. But I think the eye wants alliteration, just like the ear wants alliteration. We want to hear words rhyme with other words, and we want to see things sort of the peaks of roofs and the 45-degree angles want to be replicated in what we see. I think there's a comfort to that too. And I really like that cotton, the way it stays in the field off toward the background, and then it collects in late August, early September on the side of the road. There used to be the story about this old woman that picked up enough cotton off the side of the road to make herself a bale and a half, and it was just waste cotton that everybody else was leaving on the side of the road. I'm not tired of the rural southern landscape yet, and I'm gonna keep painting it until I am. So it changes. It never ceases to fascinate me.
Yes, sir. Let's see.
One way or the other. Another thing you asked me about are those brand loyalty things, and I need to sort of address that. I remember once when I was in high school and playing football, And a guy came running up after the play, and he got in our huddle, and he's from the opposite team. And everybody shoot him away. The referee came over there and got him out. And he said, "Well, we have the same colors. I thought we were dressed in solid red with white numbers rather than solid white with red numbers." And he just his brand loyalty got confused there. Mine goes back to Levi's. I remember where I got my first pair of Levi's and who I bought them from. And in 1860, people had brand loyalty that had to do with blue and gray. And when I started painting these tunics, I think there are two Confederate ones in this exhibition. I don't paint a gray one unless I paint a blue one. I don't paint a blue one unless I paint a gray one. But the blue ones are selling more than the gray ones are. So how you figure that out, I don't know. But they're the same image. They're the same, because as you know, when a lot of Confederate soldiers wore blue uniforms because they were cold, and they found them on dead soldiers and took them off and wore them because they were underarmed and underfed, undershod. And it's a piece of history that interests me a lot, although I made my peace with it a long time ago. I'm trying to remember where I saw this jacket. It might have been online, or it might have been in Charleston, South Carolina. But you can imagine that in blue. I changed it. A friend of mine who's an illustrator called me on the carpet and said, "You got that all wrong. Those blue collars, that would have been cavalry. It wouldn't have been artillery." I said, "Man, you're frustrated for not doing something I'm not trying to do." I said, "You read it correctly as a Civil War era uniform, and that's all. Verisimilitude is after what I'm after. I'm not an illustrator." And interestingly enough, you've been talking about design and all. These guys also talk about the tyranny of the art director. They'll make something, they pour their heart out into the work of art and show it to the art director, and he doesn't like it. I've never had that problem because I've never been an illustrator. I just make paintings and then make the audience for them. But you can see how much fun this was to paint. It's dripping, it's splattering. And I threw a little gold leaf on the buttons and a little gold leaf up in the words brand loyalty. So this is a joy to make. These things are totally indulgent on my part.
This morning.
See, that's the same jacket, but it's got a rose at the top now. And I threw that shadow in because that's an illusion you can do. And I can say this without fear of contradiction too, I am cursed with the ability to draw. Not every artist does, and not every artist makes his own work. But I do both of those things. I can draw pretty well, and I make these things myself. I don't job them out to assistants. It's what I do. The process of how this painting was made is as much as part of the subject as the object itself.
Exactly.
But there's another way to look at this work. It's all about primary color, red, yellow, and blue. That's what it's about. And gray is a nice neutral background to put everything on. And the rose, that's a symbol. Who knows what that's about? That just kind of showed up in a few paintings, and I let it. I don't resist it. You asked me one of your questions about, well, do I conceive these things before I make them? No, certainly not. They make themselves. And if you get that little bit of magic, not all paintings do that. When I closed down my studio in Virginia, I found a lot of paintings that I had abandoned. I don't throw anything away. I'm too Scottish for that. But I rolled them up and put them up there years ago, and I brought them down to Florida, and I'm working on them and finishing them. It took 7 or 8 years in some instances, but I hadn't looked at them either. So I just roll them up. Rather, if I can't finish it, if I lose contact with the painting, I put it away and wait for it. And some I'll never finish because they won't give me anything back. But this one, the brand loyalty certainly did. The painter's pants, I don't know if there are any of those in the exhibition or not, but I feel strongly about the Levi's. I usually blow the left knee of my Levi's out, and I've been painting in them. They go into the studio. Yeah, now that I'm down in Florida, I'm painting in shorts more than ever.
And see, that's what I'm glad that you've mentioned that, because like the painter's pants stand out with everything else, because we've got two. We've got a small, and then we've got the larger one. And you've got the tunics, we've got the landscapes, the fighter planes and all of this. And then there's these painter's pants. And I love the way they're painted, because you see there is obviously paint on the paper, but then you see the splatters of paint on the shorts.
Yeah, and that's hard to make. It's really hard to make that look right. To make it just happens naturally when you're painting in your pants. There's other things. I've been asked about that World War II aircraft. I grew up, I taught myself to see by looking at old Collier's Life and Look magazines that my maternal grandmother kept. She had sons in that war. And so she kept all those things. And every summer when I'd go to visit her, I'd go pour all those magazines in. And so the cropped photograph, the cropped black and white photographs is basically how I learned to see. And the Columbus Air Force Base had a training school. They still do, I think. They train pilots. And so we were in Mathiston, Webster County, Mississippi, and just due west of Columbus. And those guys would fly those planes over real low and do barrel rolls and kind of and sort of learn to fly and maneuver right at a low, very low level. And so I use it whenever I can. You see them coming in now. They're coming in from the right, and off to the left is a hand holding a Navy Colt pistol, a cap and ball pistol from the 19th century. One's from the 20th, one's from the 19th. You know, when you look at these, they're the classic religious triptych. There's a painting in the center, and off to the left is a panel, and to the right is a panel that relates in some way or the other. And that pistol in that hand off to the left, if you look at the deer head just above the figure on the right panel, that's an entry wound from a rifle shot, which is the deer skin that I got, and the exit wound. No, the exit wound is entrance wound is to the right. The exit wounds up above. But yeah, I wanted to put those in there. I had that deer hide for 15 years before I ever had a chance to use it. So I finally got a chance to use it, and I put it in there. I'm putting this together for the first time too. There's that Dalmatian dog, the 3-dog allegory, and then there's a zebra. And it's about the period of time. I've got a friend, a buddy over in Mississippi that's a big game hunter, and he goes to Africa, and he was kind of talking about online about killing a zebra. And I asked him rhetorically, I said, what's the difference between killing a zebra and shooting a mule? And his children were on him real bad about all this hunting and fishing he's done. And so he said, you didn't help me, and I felt bad about that. But I felt like I needed something there that was like the Dalmatian, but that's another animal in nature that's black and white color. And the zebra, I've spent a little time in Africa, and they disappear. They look radically visual, black and white, striped like that, but you see them off in the wild and they just disappear. The camouflage really works. So nature knows what she's doing.
So there.
So it's in my consciousness. I was telling these stories. I was talking to my buddies, the big game hunter. But now you see those birds, those white birds almost disappear. But they create a horizontal line compositionally, but they're also like the cotton that got up and flew. So those things matter to me. They help make sense out of the painting, it seems to me. And I make them, as I said, because I want to see. Yeah, you know how it is. I'm an inveterate collector. I have in my studio in Virginia, I just had shelves with objects all over them. You know, with things there, like that figure off to the left in that panel there. That's holding up. That's part of an old trophy. I don't know where I got that. The shells. I don't know where I got those things. The deer horns I picked up because they shed them every year. You know, I just pick them up, and I live with these things. These objects have their own story. And when you put one next to another, the story changes incredibly. But I'm trying to make it balanced in a way, you know how we artists are. I've got a little deer hide over to the left and a little deer hide over to the right. And I like that veneer off to the upper right-hand corner. You see that brick kind of veneer. That's a piece of linoleum, but it's made to look like brick. I saw an old boy that had put that brick veneer all over his station wagon. So when he was driving down the road, it looked like he had a brick car. And I like that quite a lot. And upper left-hand corner on that panel over there at the very top, those are Indonesian words. I found that when I was in Indonesia, I found those words carved into a sign for some reason, and it was thrown away. I just picked it up and brought it home. I knew I'd use it somewhere and somehow, and was glad to do it.
Everywhere you look within this work specifically, there's something new to see. And then kind of, it makes,
that happens to me when I'm driving up and down the road. There's always something new to see. I think what we do as artists is we have a kind of we're kind of aesthetic archaeologists. See, it's almost like the states of Mississippi and Alabama. If you put them, it's like a Rorschach test. But that red roofed house is an old structure I'm working on. I own it. My mother spent the last 20 years of her life in it. And at the bottom of those Walker hounds. And when I was in Virginia, a lot more than I am now, I would go out to Middleburg and see the fox hunt out there. Those red jackets. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a fox hunter. They didn't have horses. They went out at night in pickup trucks, turned the dogs loose, and they just ran all over the place. And so that's part of the culture that interests me. And all those dog tails, when you see them wagging, you lose the dog and you put the tail, so you can see it under the red roof. They're just the dog's tails. Your imagination has to put the rest of it to work there.
I mean, perspective lines that shoot across the picture plane that kind of lead your eye across and such is just, again, one of the most interesting things about these works to me is that those little marks are there. And I just,
well, I'm glad you're seeing them, and I want you to point that out to everybody else too, because it's great to see this like this. When I was working on it, you can see the Starnes house just kind of reversed, but I've spent a lot of time on that porch just looking out at a landscape that's not like the one that's a little bit of Virginia, a little bit of Mississippi. It's all kind of mixed together, but the sky's dark, and I'd never know whether these storms are coming in or going out. And it's whether or not you're an optimist or a pessimist about these things, I suppose. But the dark, dramatic sky interests me quite a lot. And late of an afternoon, early in the morning. I'm sorry. The gold-leafed word is just an object. The word Mississippi shows up in a lot of my work because it's an object. When you think about it, it is a damned object. And the buffalo are moving with the cattle in this regard here, and the dogs and the Dalmatian. So all that's some of these that agri building, that bar in the upper left-hand corner, is one that's in North Carolina, and I've used it any number of times. Sometimes it's green, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's unpainted. I just use it because it's a nice shape. It's about the same size as the temple of Nike Zeus on the Acropolis, and a lot of that farm building is reminiscent of Greek revival and Greek structures. Indiana, and I had no idea where this painting was going to go, but I do like the drips and splatters. And I primed it white, then I primed it gray, which is the color that the snow gets to be after a while. And the painting just made itself. I tied it together with the road at the bottom, because this is the way I see the landscape. From the window of my automobile at a high rate of speed, usually with an adult beverage in my hand. Well, that's the interesting thing about snow is it always melts. It will go away.
That's again one of
photography has cut us loose, and it does the job of realism in a way that the painter doesn't have to do anymore. But I allude to that deep space by those box shapes, But can you see what you can see the ironing board cover now that I pointed it out. That fits over an ironing board, and I remember I bought it at a little market out. Bought those two in a little market out from Bangkok, and I never knew how I was going to use them, but I knew I'd get around to it. And so when you mount them on the canvas and cut an eye hole in one and have something red dripping out, it reads as blood and it reads as a hooded figure. And we all know what the hooded figures do in our part of the world. So
yes,
and one of the things I've tried to do is that visual alliteration. That small landscape at the bottom it's flat, but my allusions to deep space is the other thing. And it's the same landscape that I'm showing at the top up there, with mountains in the background, the alluring sky. And I like what snow does to the landscape. It abstracts the landscape. You can only see things that stand out. Cattle especially look interesting out there in the snow. They're like bronze sculpture, So a lot of these things are influenced by that first snow I saw in Lafayette County, Mississippi, and then the 10 years I spent in the mountains of North Carolina, where the four seasons are so radical. There's so much ungodly. I mean, we're in our part of the world, summer lasts 6-8 months, There's that brown season, and occasionally you get a little snow and ice, but like we did in '51. And a lot of people still remember that. Well, I hope I've seen my last cold winter, though. I'm getting a lot of work done here in Florida. Everybody else complains and whines about it. I'll live with it in my art. And making paintings, as I said before we started taping this thing, the pandemic came and went, and I never noticed, because getting up in the morning and going to the studio is just what I do. I take it off the top of the day. Something I learned from writers. Mr. Hemingway said that he liked to take his writing off the top of the day. And so I get in the studio and work. And I've traveled less, as we all have, and so I've gotten more work done. But one of the things that's a pleasant surprise to me is that I'm making the best work of my life right now. And I make it and send it out. I've got dealers that take it, occasionally sell a piece, and even less occasionally send me a check for it. But it's a great life all the way around. But I'm the third best artist in my family. My wife's a painter. Linda Burke's a great artist. And our daughter, Maggie, who I don't remember ever giving an art lesson, is living in London. And she just got her master's degree over there and got shows coming up in Paris and places like that. I mean, you know, going to Paris from London is kind of like you going to Vicksburg, you know, from Monroe. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump, you know.
Exactly.
So it's a great life. And art is a kind of currency. I used to say jokingly that being an artist was like having an American Express card and you never had to pay the bill because it'll get you into places, it'll take you places. And when you travel, you go to museums, you go to galleries, you eat the food of these places, and you understand their culture just a little bit better because you know the objects that the people make, that the culture makes, means a lot. We've said all there is to say.
I think so. We've been chatting for an hour. So,
It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad the art's being seen. I'm glad it's in Monroe.
Mhm.
And it matters a lot to me. Now go out and beat people up and make them come in and see it.
Yes, sir. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, I hope it makes some sense.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.